I'm Scott Glover, based in Mount Pleasant, Texas, on this DC-3 November 5106 X-ray. The story kind of starts back a ways, and I won't take too much time, but I was 15 years old when I flew to Oshkosh the first time with my dad in a baking deuce. And when we landed, we got there and looking at all the DC-3s with everybody standing under it, and me at 15 years old, I was mesmerized by this particular airplane, and you know, all the bombers and fighters and everything, impressed with all of them, but I had just a love affair for the DC-3 at that age, and I said someday I'm going to own one. And so when I was 23, I went and got my type rating down to South Texas, took a week's vacation, and again, never saw a DC-3 again until I was in my early 30s, and started looking for one and ended up buying this one. Knew nothing of its history. It was a nice airframe. It was kind of a polished airframe that needed polishing, sitting in Arlington, Texas with a blown engine. The other engine had about 1,000 hours on it. So I ended up buying the airplane. I knew it was built as a C-47, and then after the war it was used as a General Motors corporate airplane. And then the University of Southern Illinois, I knew that basic history, but I never even knew it left the States. So I bought the airplane, we put a new engine on it in Arlington in the field, and flew it home. And that other engine always gave us trouble, and about 16 hours later we seized a bearing in it, and so I parked the airplane. There's a difference between being able to buy something and being able to afford it. And in my early 30s, I could buy the thing, but I couldn't really afford it. So I parked it and put it in a hangar. Got a phone call back in May of 2008 from a David Elliott. And he said, you know, can you verify your military serial number? And I said, well, my serial number is 9058. He said, no, that's FAA stuff. He said, there's a military serial number, should be on the data plate. So on the cell phone, never met the guy. I walked up the airplane, and cold chills right now on my arms just thinking about it. And I looked up, and sure enough, the original data plate was right behind the co-pilot's head. And most of those data plates had been removed, because once it's converted from a C-47 to a DC-3, it's no longer a C-47. They throw that data plate away, and then there's really no correlation between the two. So luckily, this airplane had the data plate 4232832. He says, I have a story to tell you. He said, your airplane flew D-Day. It dropped the 507th Paratroop Infantry. I said, wow. So, you know, I knew it was over in Europe. We didn't know anything else. So David and I struck up this relationship. David, as it turns out, his dad was Billy Elliott. He flew in the 53rd Troop Carrier Squadron. And he thought his dad was the pilot or co-pilot of this airplane, which in fact, we found the orders to send the airplane from Miami to North Africa. His dad was listed on the manifest as a passenger, not a pilot. So he did all this research thinking this was his dad's airplane, when in fact it was John Wood and Don King's airplane. But anyway, he did the research, and we struck a friendship, and then he started trying to help me find the history of the airplane. I've been really working on the airplane for several years, but made the decision to do the cosmetic restoration only in about February. But you know, from the time I bought it, we've hung 2 brand new engines on it. The airplane's got less than 25 hours on it since we put 2 new engines, new props. We did everything firewall forward, new hydraulic lines and fuel lines, and new tires. I found a set of disc brakes, which is a really big deal if you're a DC-3 guy out there. You really want a set of disc brakes if you can find them. And then we made the decision to go ahead and do the cosmetic restoration. We stripped the airplane and removed all the control surfaces, put all brand new fabric on it, and just came back up with it with the D-Day schemed paint. And there's no way to do a restoration and it be exactly D-Day, because then those mission stencils wouldn't be on there that represented Market Garden. So this is a representative paint job, a show paint job that represents what it did by the end of the war. So by the end of the war, the D-Day paint schemes, paint stripes would have been off. So we took bits and pieces of all of the missions, and we left it on the airplane to have this representation for people to see what it did. Well, we tried to be as accurate as we could with the markings that we put on the aircraft. We didn't put any markings that really were not there back in the day when it flew. The 3A on the side, it's representative of the 53rd Troop Carrier Squadron. And a bit of trivia there. There's 13 airplanes that flew the southern route that went across to North Africa. This was the only airplane that made it back to the States of the original 53rd Troop Carrier Squadron. So 3A is that's what that stands for. You look back at the back of the airplane and you'll see camels and you'll see red crosses. The camels represent supply missions to the front line. They didn't have to be in North Africa, but that's where they primarily were. So missions to the front line represented a camel, and then there would be a Red Cross when they would bring back wounded, a hospital ambulance mission back. And as told to me by Gerald Parker, who actually flew this airplane on some of those supply missions out and back, he said when they first got over there, they would get to paint a camel on and they'd get to paint a Red Cross on. He said after they got 25, 30, 40 those things on there, and they hadn't been there very long, they figured out that's just what they did, and they quit painting them on because it wasn't that big of a deal. That's just what the airplane did. He said it literally flew hundreds of those missions. So I painted a few on the airplane just to represent, you know, this is what it did. But the missions that really count would be the parachutes, the things that you see in white there, and we'll give you a detail of those in a written form. But in a nutshell, we start off with Husky 1 and Husky 2. That was the invasion of Sicily there in North Africa, and Husky 2 was the mission that I can't remember the exact amount of airplanes, but about 25 to 30 DC-3s were shot down by our own Navy. So just a terrible thing that happened on that second mission. So those were the first two parachute symbols on the airplane. The third symbol would be representative of the invasion of Italy at Salerno, and then we would go over to the fourth parachute would represent the invasion of France, D-Day. The fifth parachute, sixth, and seventh. The fifth parachute would be representative of the first drop in the invasion of Holland with Market Garden. And then you'll see the man pulling the glider. I had to really research that one. I looked in books and I Googled it. I could not find that mission symbol. And Gerald Parker told me it was a man pulling a glider. And of all things, I found on a wall a photograph of a stencil painted on a wall in France that was that man pulling that glider, and I had my graphics artist take it. I said it was a Waco glider, and so he created that for me. So I don't know if that's exactly the way it looked, but it's about as good as I've seen anyone do it. So that was the second mission for Market Garden. Then the third mission was a supply drop. It was a bundle behind the lines, and that was the last mission Don King flew. The airplane and the group went on to fly Varsity, which was the crossing of the Rhine. So the unique thing about this airplane, it flew the very first mission of U.S. involvement in World War II in Europe, and it flew the very last mission as far as infantry parachute mission. And so we're just incredibly privileged to have the history to go along with the aircraft. It kind of makes the aircraft really come alive. Here we are inside of the DC-3 5106 X-ray. We just talked about the outside restoration. When it came to the inside, you kind of had to make a decision. Do you really want to go back just absolute the way it was? It's pretty hard to exactly portray it as it was on that day and have an airplane that's still usable today, because the seats were very uncomfortable. There was no insulation. It was loud. When I bought the airplane, it was a General Motors corporate airplane, so it had a 14-passenger interior at one time. When it went to the University of Southern Illinois in 1967, they put this basic interior in it with the seats. And so we had a 24-passenger seating configuration in here. There's FAA things that went on. Bottom line is we've got 18 seats back in the back. The jump seat is number 19, so 19 or less is how we have to operate this under Part 91. I wanted the people, when they walked in the airplane, I wanted to have a military theme. So I used, this is all FAA approved quilting material that's used in the cargo bays of military airplanes. I found that. It took me a while to find this material. It's all been burn tested. So we used that material, and then I wanted to use like a canvas bag, the Army drab canvas bags that all the guys would be having. I wanted that to be the seats. So we found that material, had it burn treated, so we're legal there. and that's what we went back with. And the restroom in the back and all was put in by General Motors, and I just had everything refinished. But I just kept the same cabinetry. Up front there's a galley area and some storage, and I kept all that the same as well. So now then, we've got an airplane that we can comfortably carry 18 passengers in, and it's just, but yet we still have the military theme. We went ahead and put overhead speakers in, and we've got it hooked up to an iPod, so we've got 1940s music playing when people come in and out, and it's just a lot of fun. We get a lot of compliments on the airplane. There's a few diehards that say, "Oh, this wasn't the way it was when we jumped," and that's all right. They can get over it. But we're having a lot of fun with the airplane. It's my intentions to do a cockpit restoration this next year. It's pretty much the way I found it. We've overhauled a lot of the instruments, but they're not exactly in the right spot. And the panel's a little dirty, and so we would like to make it be representative of the rest of the airplane. I just ran out of time. We're aboard November 5106 X-ray, a DC-3, and I'm with Gerald Parker. Very honored to have him aboard. We first met back in February this year, and here we are today. This has been in the planning now for almost a year of us coming to Sterling. This airplane has such a colorful history, and it was flown primarily by Don King, who you'll meet his wife here in a moment, Shirley King. But Gerald and Don were best friends, and they both flew in the 53rd Troop Carrier Squadron. They both flew airplanes over to North Africa via the southern route. And although this was primarily Don King and John Wood's airplane, on occasion Gerald would fly captain on this airplane with Don as co-pilot on various supply missions in North Africa. And anything you want to say about that would be, it's just a lot of history here to have a pilot that actually flew it on missions in the war with us, and in wonderful health. And
Thank you.
And you play golf almost every day, don't you?
No, but I play every week.
Every week, okay. We won't exaggerate.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be here. It was exciting to find out that this airplane is still able to fly, and isn't it beautiful? It didn't ever look this beautiful when I flew it, but I'm just so pleased to be a part of this, and don't know how we'll ever pay for it, but it's fantastic. Actually, when Don joined our squadron at Pope Field, I had just checked out as a first pilot, and my first flight was a practice parachute drop. He was my co-pilot, and it was his first flight in the squadron. And we clicked off very well, and we were really the closest friends. He had grown up in South Dakota and had never driven a car. And so I taught him how to drive a Jeep and a weapons carrier, and he had trouble with the double clutching on the weapons carrier, so I think he just stayed with Jeeps. And,
he could fly an airplane, but couldn't drive a car.
Yeah, that's right. He had never driven a car, and he hated to admit it, but I understand our flight surgeon asked him to drive him someplace. He said, "I can't."
That's funny.
Yeah.